Today we will be discussing developing and driving a continuous improvement culture with a remote team. This is something that we thought would be very applicable to what's happening right now, looking at the world and how our offices and teams and everyday function has changed so dramatically due to COVID-19. And I know that a lot of organizations are looking at making some of these permanent changes. So knowing how to engage your team remotely, how to get them tied in with change management, with continuous improvement is a really important topic. So for those of you who are new to EZSigma, we just wanted to let you know a little bit about us with our vision and mission statement you can see on the screen. We're also very passionate about making processes and everyday tasks more efficient. And the more efficient you can do those things, that gives you more time that you can spend with your family, your friends, doing the things that you really love. So today we also wanted to let you know we do offer many different solutions. We're not only a training and consulting firm, we also offer several different softwares through partners that we do have, which you can see on the screen. So if any of these are of any interest to you, definitely feel free to reach out to us. So today's webinar is going to be presented by Jeff Woods. He is a Master Black Belt. He's been with EZSigma for quite a few years now. I've had the pleasure of working with him. He does a lot of our consulting and training, both in person and recently this year, virtual training we've been doing. He's got experience in many different industries, and he's great at bringing that examples in real life situations when he is teaching. So I think you're really going to enjoy listening to what he has to say on this topic. And just lastly, before I pass the mic over to Jeff, I'm just going to ask everyone to mute your microphones or your phones just so that we prevent any background noise from coming in. So Jeff, I will pass it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. As Liz mentioned, my name is Jeff Woods, and I'll be your facilitator or take you through the deck and the conversation today. And really what I'm hoping to do is to introduce a couple of topics and then sort of throw some questions out, not for you to answer now, but potentially for some things for you to reflect on around your own organization, where it sits in this continuum, because there's been, to Liz's point around the change with COVID-19, it's had dramatic changes to some organizations, less to others, depending on what type of business you're in and kind of where you fit within that. So, sorry, a little bit thirsty there. And so we're going to walk through this and want you to be thinking about kind of what's change has happened in your organization, and is this a short-term, medium-term, long-term, and kind of objectively changing how you do business? And if so, how does that impact your processes and how you're organizing and looking at your dashboard for your business? So we'll talk about a bunch of those things over the next 20 minutes or so. So starting with what is continuous improvement culture? Looking at the slide here, organization with a continuous improvement culture, that shared set of knowledge, behaviors, and values between staff and leadership, which promotes the ongoing improvement to products, services, and/or processes. So those are like the things, the sort of quantifiable things that we need to do in our business to sort of drive that. And on the other side, we have, what's required, which is trust, communication, perseverance, in order for this to be successful or sustainable. So think of that as like the qualitative, the glue or the tendons, the things that make those other things work. And so from a cultural perspective, there's the what are we trying to do and what are the things we're putting in place to make that successful, and then what are the things that we have to have as the wrappers around that to actually enable this to work properly. So we want you to sort of think about kind of what you're doing, and we'll talk a little bit further around tactically sort of different things in your organization and how to sort of gauge where you're at. Why do you want to do it? Lots of benefits to a continuous improvement culture. The increases to productivity, increases to engagement, creativity, clearly promotes teamwork. Again, particularly if you're looking at a sort of a Lean Six Sigma strategy where you really are kind of working with the people who do the work and really sort of drive that organizational change up through the organization. Strategically, you have from the top where we're trying to get to, and then how you actually fulfill that comes from the grassroots of the people who do the work. We need to start with the customer experience. So again, obviously the voice of the customer. I'll sit in the middle, sorry, pardon me, I've got something stuck in my throat. And that organizational culture. And then another one here is interesting, is increasing staff retention. Because when we look at staff retention, it's kind of interesting, sort of you can think of some bosses out there or some conversations that I've had that flippantly will say, well, I'd love to see a whole bunch of my staff go. But the reality is, and they're thinking of the ones that, because they're not properly engaging, the ones that potentially aren't providing what they want to the organization. But reality is, those aren't the ones that leave. It's those high performers, those ones that are really driving and looking for an engaged organization are the ones that you're going to lose over time. So it becomes very difficult for your organization. And the other thing, one way to gauge that is you start to realize that if I have lower retention, that means I'm going to have to hire more. If I'm hiring more, I'm now pouring more and more resources into the posting process, the interview process, and all of those things that are taking up resources from your key business, which is providing service to your customers. So it really becomes a little bit of a rework issue within the organization. And of course, centrally improving the quality of services and products. So what does that look like? Again, we want to start with our customer. The voice of the customer sits in the middle or in the center. And so that customer experience, user experience. So again, what are our staff seeing? What are they in their engagement with our customers? What are they feeling? Where do they see the pain points? I always talk about what gets in the way of doing the work. What makes it hard for us to provide excellent products or service or advice or whatever we're doing for our customers. So really kind of getting that engage point. Leadership support, which is that sort of third piece of the stool. Engage leadership and gain support for improvement. And really what you're looking at doing is, through a number of different lenses, thinking about what you're trying to be as an organization. So you need to really have that end goal in mind about what you're trying to achieve. And so often that starts at that leadership level where they're going, okay, so where are we today? As an organization, we are what we are. So what does that look like? And do we even have a handle on understanding our key metrics and drivers and what's our reputation in the workplace, et cetera? So what does that look like? And then where do we want to be? So what's driving our strategy? This is where we are today. Where do we want to be in the future? And how are we going to get there? What strategic changes and projects and drive is going to move us along that continuum, and then how we're going to measure it? And one of the things that works well for that is the Hoshin Kanri model, the X matrix model. So if you think about that X matrix, where really we're looking, first and foremost around where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years? So what's our stretch goal? And then the second component of that is, well, how far do we want to get this year? What are our goals this year? And that becomes the next side of the matrix. The third side is, well, what projects, what things are we going to tactically do within the organization to achieve what we need to do this year to make sure that we're successful in our 3 to 5 year plan? And then the fourth side of that is, well, what metrics are we tracking? So how do we know whether we're being successful in those projects and whatever those strategies that we're trying to implement? So an X matrix is a really good starting point, because again, you need to do it for a purpose. Why are we trying to drive continuous improvement into our organization? What are we trying to achieve? And I want you to think about, Lean Six Sigma or whatever your strategy is. It's not the end. It's a deliverable. It's something that engages you. Its purpose is to help you be successful in driving that change. So it's the lever that you use to get the results you want and help you be successful in driving change in the organization versus putting it in place because we wanted to have it in place. And kind of once we get that sort of side that we understand our customers, understand our staff, understand sort of strategically what are we trying to do, how we go about it, collaboration, promoting teamwork and collaboration, breaking down those silos within the organization and really getting flow and understanding how things move. Think of a value stream map about how things are moving across and through the organization. Have we set up metrics in our silos that are actually inhibiting us from being able to deliver products effectively to our customers? Because what's important in one silo may not be important in the next silo, but the customer is going horizontally through our organization and they feel that pain. So you want to think about how we can work together. If you're moving, depending on where you are in your maturity model, quick successes, begin with the easy things. Let's start with that low-hanging fruit, as the expression goes, and let's get some quick wins. Let's prove to the organization, let's prove to ourselves, let's prove to our staff that this is working. Let's be able to go around the wheel of change, make lots of quick, small improvements that we can now start to add up to see that change. And then we can start to tackle bigger and bigger issues as we go. And when you think about quick successes, I always think about a dripping tap, right? So the tap's dripping, which is inefficiencies within our business. But if we put a stopper, it's amazing just how much water is collecting. So how much is leaking out of the organization. So if we can really start to collect and ideally have a good way of how we're actually measuring and collecting that information organizationally and having it funnel in so we can sort of see what the aggregate gain is, that's important to put in place. And then once we make those changes, make sure we're standardizing them. Make sure we use a standardized approach to how we're making change. And also, once we've made a change, that we're standardizing it into the way that we do work. And that doesn't mean that it can't change again. A good standardized process is something that can continue to change as the outside realities change. And we can think about what we just went through. Organizations that had good standard processes that were consistent were in a much better position to move to home office and getting people outside of the business because there was a standard block of here's how we do it, here's how we're going to do it moving forward, versus I don't know, it was crazy before, and how are we going to do this when we're not even in the office? So it's so standardizing and is really important, and celebrating, right? When we're making those changes, we tend to be heads down and just move forward. And organizations are quite happy to take all you have to give. So it's really important to stop, recognize the change has happened, celebrate that success, and that might be a 15-second celebration. Woohoo! Right? Cheers. Okay, let's get on to the next thing. But make that happen, because within that celebration, you also have reflection on, what worked well, what could we have done better, so that you're always using that as an opportunity to improve your process of improving processes as you go along also. And again, it comes back to the continuing momentum, incorporate that feedback, keep making things better and better as you move forward. People are learning more, getting good experience. We can see those goals, make sure that we're tracking and have quantifiable ways of capturing and knowing, because at some point someone's going to ask, well, what's the ROI? What's the improvement been to the company? And you want to have that number and be able to discuss that in very quickly, which is important. And we'll talk a little bit around that experience and training and what we move as we move forward. But as you're looking at that end goal, you might want to start to think about things like, what are our key performance indicators, right? What does performance look like now versus what we need it to look like in the future? How much of an improvement do we need to make on a monthly or annual basis? Again, think back to that X matrix. What behaviors do we want to promote in the company? What do we need people to be doing for that from a cultural perspective? What core competencies do we have today versus what core competencies are we going to need in the future? What kind of leadership do we need? And I'm thinking leadership in the big L and small l throughout the organization. What kind of leadership attributes do we need? And how do we put those in place? So that are we organizationally able to promote and develop leaders within the organization to prepare them to be successful as you go forward? Those are all the things that you want to be thinking about as you're sort of putting, that sort of drive in place. I'm just going to pause for a moment. Again, as Liz mentioned, you can send any questions in by chat, or you can get a ask at the end of today, or you can follow up with this in the future. But as I'm going through, from time to time, I'll just pause for a minute or two, and or a few seconds. And if you have a question, go ahead. No need to come on and say no questions. I will take quiet as no questions, and I'll just start again. So I'll just take a pause for a moment. Okay, so we've been talking about this whole, CI culture or culture of organization. And one of the important things is to understand, well, what is the current cultural temperature in our organization? Going by this, looking at this here, the culture of your organization will determine how agile and responsive staff and teams are to change. More than 70% of cultural change programs fail due to the lack of focus on mindsets and behaviors, those real drivers of strategy. So how do we know what's going on today? How do we know what our organization looks like? What direction is it moving in? Kind of what's where are we in the forest of cultural change within our organization? And so some of the things that you might want to think about as you're sort of gauging and looking around at your organization and wondering, where are we? Some things, again, to think about. One is evaluating your onboarding process. So when you're hiring new people, kind of what does that look like? How engaging are we in how we bring them in? How modern are our aspects of how we look at things like training methods? Whether we just give them here, read this manual and I'll talk to you next week, or do we have really good engagement with people about how to move into the organization? In our hiring processes, what are we looking for as attributes of employees to do the work that we want them to do? And that work is around the tactical piece, but also that component of a cultural piece about what you're trying to build organizationally. And so some organizations that I've worked with are now building in lean thinking modules. So thinking lean and understanding the language and sort of as a module within onboarding for every employee, because we want every new employee to understand what we mean by lean, what we're trying to do as an organization, what our expectations of them are around helping us drive change, and what our commitment is to be open to and drawing those ideas out of them. Again, often new employees are some of the best people to ask about, well, what's going on, because everything is fresh and new. They see everything, versus someone who's been there for 10 years, has really good understanding and legacy, but so many things, well, that's just the way it is. and they don't see the option for change sometimes. So you really want to make sure that you're driving that from the onset. And so one way of doing that, as I say, is to actually build a lean module, introduction to lean or lean language or whatever it is that you want people to know, so that when they're starting, if you're having huddles or if you're doing whatever you're doing or using language like Kaizen or DSM, that everybody knows what that means, so that they feel like, and it's a term I like to use but it's used all the time now because of COVID, but you want them to be inside the bubble. You want everybody to feel like they are on the change team, that they're part of the change. So they're inside the bubble, not outside, where they don't understand, they're not part of it, they don't know the language, they don't know what people are talking about, and they feel that this is something that happens to them versus they're part of it. So things to think about. Another thing is gauging openness within leadership. Changing company culture requires a movement, not a mandate. So what is leadership doing to really, and again, thinking of leadership at important at that highest level, but throughout all the layers within the organization. What are we doing to make sure that we're always drawing ideas and we're supporting the people that work with us to move forward. So gauging openness with leadership and what that looks like, which can also look around our incentive programs, or how are we incenting, and I don't mean monetarily, but just organizationally, how do we incent people to help bring change about, right? To bring ideas in, to talk about them. Do we engage that as a key component to our huddles, which are a really, really great way of having quick and frequent informal communication flow up and down the organization. Thinking about how our teams are interacting, right? Do they respect one another's ideas and opinions? Do they relate on an interpersonal level? Do they function cohesively as a team? Do we have free exchange of dialogue in unique perspective, or is it so how are we organized? How does my team work? How does our organization or my division work? What can I do if I want to start to move things forward? What can I do within my area to make everything that I'm involved with work better? Always think about that. What can I do better in the organization? And you can also look at, asking questions of your organization and then understanding from those answers, like, where are people sitting? So things like, what didn't go so well last year? Were there any cringe-worthy moments? Like, what were some of those? And then what's the feedback you're getting about people's perspective of the organization? What was something that was terrible that happened last year? What was something that was great that happened last year? Are we learning from our mistakes? And all those different things. What can we do differently over the next 12 years? What breakthrough moments did you experience? What were some of those fantastic things that we did last year? Always important in my mind to look at, what are we doing well? Because lots of organizations are doing great things. So start with, what are we doing well? What are some of those good things? And then let's look at, well, what are some of the opportunities for improvement? So what things could we do better? And really kind of moving that along. So those are some of the ways that you can start to look at and think about, well, where are we? Where are we on that continuum? Because if we're going to be moving forward as an organization, what shape is that car in that we're trying to get around the track, so to speak? So planning for a continuous improvement journey, again, kind of brings us back to some of the early things around understand your current state. So do we know where we are, where we're trying to get to? What sort of methodology of approach do we want to use to be successful? What we're going to standardize to? And again, we think that Lean Six Sigma is a great one to use. Educate on the structure of what we do. And in my mind, and again, I talked a little bit about it with the onboarding, but in my mind, everybody in the organization should at least have a basic understanding of process improvement, whether that's a kind of using the sort of belt terms of a white belt that they've been I've had an introduction to lean thinking or an introduction to Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma, depending on your organization, that everybody has that base level so that they're inside the bubble. And then based on what position people are in and what's expected of them, tailor the training to fit what they need, to give them the tools and the learning and the understanding to be successful. Because people want things to be better, but one of the challenges sometimes in organizations is, yeah, I know that this could be better, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to move it. So what can we do to give people the tools that they need and communicate and mentor support to help them be successful? Which, again, going back to that, starting with very small, easy individual projects. How do I think about it from a perspective of how do I make my role better? Like, what can I do to change what's in my area or my work unit, versus up a tier would be my work unit or my division, versus up a tier would be my division / across the enterprise. So as you go across, again, making change, make sure that you're measuring it, celebrating it, reinforcing it, and repeating it. And again, that communication is a huge piece around that. So when we think about that around driving a remote team, again, what's really important, and you've probably seen this, is communication, how we communicate, how often we communicate, what ways we communicate. Really important to be, as much as possible, outcome driven. The presenteeism has changed with remote teams, particularly people working from home. And so you really want to make sure that you're outcome driven. Check-ins, ways that you're communicating back and forth, make sure that you have lots of different ways of how you can communicate, different ways for everybody to make it easy for people to know what's going on, so shared calendars, etc. Making sure people have resources. Again, more important than ever to be making sure that you understand and are checking in and giving people what they need to be successful, and being able to listen to some of their challenges, particularly with some of the things going on right now. Again, focusing on outcomes. Some of the things to think about, because if you've gone from a culture that was in the office and was working on things like, for example, had Gemba walks, had huddles, how are you handling that moving forward? How are you making sure that people can still see and get that virtual Gemba walk in? Are you still holding remote huddles? Have you had to change the format of how those things are working? Because that's quite possible. And another thing around all of the change that's been going on right now is that a good way to sort of gauge reality is a whole bunch of processes have changed because they had to, because we've sent people home. But have we documented that? Have we actually updated the processes, or are we just kind of working in that sort of mash unit, just make it work for today? And so one suggestion that's worked really well with a lot of organizations is, sending out a message to all your employees to say, hey, what things or processes have improved with the change to virtual, right? So because there are things that, hey, we made some changes and it's actually working better. So get that collection of things that are working well. And then, also ask them for things or processes that have degraded, right? What are opportunities for us to maybe do some reviewing? Because, it's kind of holding on by a shoestring, but, this one is really a problem. We got to do something about it. So it's an opportunity to get that list. You may want to, if you're collecting that information, think about how you want to categorize it by area, division, kind of type of role, type of pain point, whatever, so that you can sort of collect and get a really good feel for what's going on in the organization or even within your team. But, from a continuous improvement, if your role is driving a continuous improvement within the organization, then you're going to really want to make sure that as we move forward, that we're really looking at those processes and making sure that we're holding all improvements that we've made, and that we're not sliding in other areas, and we make a list of prioritization of what processes we want to be looking at. And it's really interesting because from a continuous improvement perspective, organization, I've talked about this in other webinars, but organizations and individuals have been really fantastic at accepting change, right? So that resistance to change right now is really low, which is helping change happen faster. People are more open to risk. People are more accepting of change. They realize reality is things had to change because now I'm at home and I used to be in an office or wherever you work. And so you want to be thinking about how that fits. And the other piece around that is it might be working right now, but from a sort of a battle fatigue perspective, at what point do we have to make sure that we're, from a cultural perspective and a continuous improvement cultural perspective, that we're holding on to everybody, because we don't want, if this goes on for a year or 2 years, or if we decide this is the new normal for our organization, then we're going to really need to think about all of the pieces that have to be in place. And just sort of a fun kind of slide here. You often saw lots of these before around things from a different perspective, but working from home, has had a lot of challenges. And again, different organizations have different realities, and also different individuals within those organizations, depending on, what their status is around, are they married, do they have children at home, or other family members, how is that working, what space do they have, connectivity, being able to connect to the workplace, lots of different things going on. But so I thought I'd put something a little bit light up at the end here. But it is interesting because perception versus reality, we have to be thinking about that, because the old expression sometimes perception is reality. So we need to be very conscious of how we're dealing with that on a daily basis. So kind of summing up, that whole plan, what do we need to do? How are we going to be successful? Making sure we've got communication wrapped around everything that we're doing. That whole collaborate, make sure that we're working together to drive change, not having it done to us, and making sure we have great metrics and that we're driving and understanding things that are working not only well, but things that don't work as well. We're not going to be perfect every time when we're trying to make changes, so let's make sure that we understand where we are so that we can make changes and adjustments and to be as successful as we can be going forward. This gives us a list of a whole bunch of different resources. Again, there's lots and lots of information out there, but this just kind of gives you some of the pieces that we used partially in putting this together, but also in as resources that we think are pretty good. So I'm going to pause there and ask if anybody has any questions. And again, we'll just take a minute here, and then we'll kind of move through our final couple slides.
Thank you, Jeff. That was fantastic. And a few points you made really stuck out. I know, especially for me, when you were speaking about standardized processes are best when they're also agile, and which is very applicable to what's going on today. And then making sure that we set those expectations for having a continuous improvement culture right from the beginning, from the hiring process. So thank you so much. We did have a question come through the chat. So the question is there a role for delegating authority from management to team members to support lean changes?
Is there a role? I mean, I think what's really important, if I'm understanding the question correctly, and it's one of those roadblocks, is that often management feels like, well, it's my job. It's my job to know how to make things better. It's my job to tell people what to do, versus it's my job to create the best environment for people to be as successful as they can be. So I think that it's really important that people work with the people that are doing the work to get the ideas. I mean, the ultimate decisions, I think, are organization decisions, and again, leadership can talk strategy about where we're trying to go, but how we get there, I absolutely, I think you want to be able to engage the people and have them feel that they have authority to be part of that decision-making process. And that works in any kind of like a union or non-unionized environment. And I think and it's all a matter of how we work and engage together. I don't know if that answered the question, but it's a key component that hinders change, because people don't want to give up kind of that resistance to change as well. That's what I'm good at. I don't want to kind of open up to others. So, any other questions or?
Not at this time. So thank you very much for that response. That definitely answered the question. So just something for everyone on the line, we just wanted to let you know, we do offer a lot of professional development, continuing education programs. Right now we are doing them through virtual training or e-learning. We do also offer corporate training when companies are comfortable having groups together. We are available for on-site training. But as I said, for now, we are doing everything remotely, consulting, coaching, project management. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about any of that. We do have a few more webinars coming up this year, so you can see on the screen the dates and the topics that we will be covering. They will also be posted through Eventbrite, so you'll be able to find them there. And if you are already connected to EZSigma through our mailing list, you will receive notifications of these webinars to sign up for them. So we definitely hope that you will be coming back and joining us, and then continue on for next year. And if there are any topics or subjects that are of special interest to you that you would like us to cover in one of these webinars, feel free to reach out directly to us at any time, phone, email, chat, and we will do our best to make sure that they are incorporated. So once again, I'd like to thank Jeff for taking the time today to talk about this topic of driving a continuous improvement culture with a remote team. And thank you as well to everyone who joined us. New faces, familiar faces. It's been great to spend this time with you. So thank you very much.
And Liz, I just wanted to say also that I really appreciate people taking the time out of their day to join us today. And if you have any questions about CI continuous improvement, please reach out to us at any time. I'd love to have a conversation. And there's lots going on, lots of change happening, and so however we can work together to make things better for the individual, the organization, and this world that we live in right now, actually. We're love to hear from you. Thanks.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.